So, good evening, everyone. Hope I'm audible and visible. This is something that we need to check during online classes. Let me know if you are unable to hear me, unless you have some problem with your net. Okay. That's right. So, what did we discuss in the last class? What did we discuss in the last class? Shushmita. Sushmita. Okay. Probably she's not there.
Hello.
Shushmita.
Yes, sir.
What did we discuss in the last class?
So we discussed mostly about ethics and how corporate governance is there in future examples.
Mostly about ethics.
What exactly is corporate governance?
Did we define it?
No, but we went through different views and opinions.
Okay. I'm not yet clear with what you say. Okay, let's move on to somebody else. Kuldeep. 147. Kuldeep. Okay, Kuldeep is not there probably. Google.
Yes, sir. Sir,
Yes, Google. What did we discuss in the last class?
in the last class, we started with the value ethics. Then we finally moved on to the stewardship model.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. For the stewardship model, basically we give the whereas the manager takes care of the complete organization and that kind of thing. So we discussed that and we ended at the stewardship model.
Okay, so Vishwanath, what does the stewardship theory say? See, please keep in mind that I do note down the people who are not responding when I make the call.
Sir, hello.
Yeah, Vishwanath, go ahead.
Yeah. So this theory, so there's a steward who takes care of the needs of others. So everyone others in the company. So
you need to get the core point. You are right, but why should they be trusted? What is the need to put the trust on the managers rather than anybody else?
yeah, so they represent ownership interests of the shareholders, and they make decisions.
It's fine. It's fine. So let's move on. So the point here is, you can mute your mic. The point here is that the stakeholders, the different stakeholders have conflicting interests between them, right? The customers want the best possible product at the lowest possible price. Employees want the highest possible salary and all benefits without much of work. So it is in conflict with each other, and managers are the best person to balance the interest of various stakeholders and guide the company in the right direction. Trust them for it. Only they know about it, and only they can guide the company, and they are good people. So that is the assumption here. They are good people. That's the assumption here. And not only that, even within the stakeholder group, it's not very clear what is the right thing, what is an ethical thing. Okay, we have seen so many examples. What is the right product? Can we call tobacco a right product? So all these things, create ethical dilemma, and the managers are the best person to solve this dilemma on their own. Nobody else can do that, and hence, the managers, basically you need to trust the managers, assume that they are good, and whatever they do, even though it looks bad to you as a customer or as an employee, you need to understand that the manager is doing it with the with the objective of balancing various stakeholders' interests. So that is what stewardship theory says. And then then what did we do? We were ready to discuss corporate governance, the third theory, third ethical theory to be applied in the context of business. So ideally, basically the original idea of we discussing this thing is that ethics is important for the human beings, but do we need ethics for the business corporations, business entities? So business entities are not the human beings. So why should they need to follow? Why do they need to follow ethics? So we answered it, the Unitarian perspective and separatist perspective, and we concluded that yes, the business entities also need to follow. But the question is, how do we apply? How do we make the business entities to follow ethical theories? They cannot follow the ethical theories that we discuss for human beings. Right, universalism, for example, may not work. Theory of rights may not work. So we need to have different ways of ensuring that the business entities follow ethics, and that's where we first discussed about theory of espoused values, right? And then we discussed about stewardship theory, and the next one is to discuss about agency theory. But before getting into agency theory, we decided that we will check the history of evolution of the corporate form. Okay, we have seen that initially we had only partnership form and sole proprietorship form, and then the problem of not the Europeans unable to do business with India came into picture. So Vasco da Gama discovered the new sea trade route, but they were unable to do business with the existing models or structures of business entities, that is sole proprietorship and partnership form. So that struggle went on for some time, and then let me get into this. Okay, the reason some people have written to me asking me why is that I'm talking about the history of corporate farm. Well, we need to talk about two things to understand corporate governance better. One is to understand the history of corporate governance, right? And another one is to understand the structure of ownership. These two things, need to be understood in a better manner before we get into agency problem. I'm sure we heard about agency problem earlier, but in this course we will discuss it in detail. So to understand agency problem and then subsequently understand corporate governance, we need to first understand why this problem was created specifically or exclusively for the joint stock companies. Corporate governance is a major problem with respect to the joint stock companies. So why joint stock companies? Basically the companies, right? The corporate governance is a major problem for the companies. Why it is so? So for that we need to understand the history of corporate form, and then we also need to understand the ownership structure of the firm. So these two things are basic to understand agency problem in a better perspective, and then proceed further and then understand corporate governance further. Okay. Is there anything that you want to clarify?
Sir, if we look at the history of when the European explorers started venturing and they wanted companies, as you said, so a lot of new type of companies were also formed, and like insurance companies, for example, came into the picture. So
insurance companies came into picture pretty late.
Sir, but still, like when the ships started going on voyages for like months and maybe years at times, insurance companies or
No, no, I do
insurance
understand.
structures were present.
No, no, insurance companies, I do understand. But before insurance companies, you need the ships, right?
Yes.
Why did they evolve? Because the ships given to the people like the sailors, like Vasco da Gama or Magellan or Amerigo Vespucci, these were all sponsored by the kings or the monarchs, okay, on the direction of the Pope. Okay, so these were sponsored by the monarch. So, the money required to build them is not a problem. But when it comes to trade, the monarchs were obviously not interested in conducting the trade. So the individual traders didn't have the money to build such a huge ships. So first we need to understand when did they started building the huge ships, and then we would get into insurance. You get
Okay,
what I say? So we are, I understand your point, but we are stuck in a previous stage. I'm meant to explain why or how these ships came into picture, the trade ships. Because earlier, as I mentioned earlier, earlier the trade was happening via this. I'm sure you can follow the mouse cursor.
the Silk Route, yes.
Yeah, and now you need to travel all the way from Western Europe to Africa and then come here. So this is a very lengthy journey, and here you cannot use the sub-Saharan African people as the intermediaries in the trade, because sub-Saharan Africa was always a dark continent. It was full of tribals, and they always kept fighting between them. And whether we like it or not, the fact is that sub-Saharan Africa never had a civilization worth the name. It never had a civilization worth the name. In Asia, we had Indus Valley civilization and the Chinese civilization. In Mesopotamian civilization, in Europe, we had a Roman civilization, Greek civilization. Even in North and South America, the Americas, which was separated from rest of the continent, they had Inca civilization, Mayan civilization, Aztec civilization. But sub-Saharan Africa, when I say sub-Saharan Africa, I'm very specific about it, right? I don't mean the North Africa. North Africa did have great civilizations, Egyptian civilization, etc. But sub-Saharan Africa never had a great civilization for whatever reason. They never had a civilization worth the name. They were not good in trading as well. They kept on fighting. And in fact, that is one of the reasons why the white people started treating the black people as inferior. Okay? So now you need to have a huge ship which would go all the way till Cape of Good Hope and then go to India. So that takes at least 4 or 5 months. You need a big ship. And to build a ship which can be in the sea for 4 or 5 months, you need huge money. Nobody had it. That's a problem. I mean, when I say nobody had it, I essentially mean the traders. The king was obviously not interested in trading. So they didn't know what to do. They were exploring multiple options. They did try it with small ships. Nothing succeeded. The monarchs were obviously not interested in doing it. The monarchs were focused on fighting among themselves. Parallelly, another experiment started unraveling. That is in the mid 16th century, that is in the 1550s. In those days when they conduct trade, they had a system called guilds. Okay, I'm sure you've heard about them. So if within the neighboring areas, if they go and conduct trade between the neighboring countries, they would have something called a guild. The guild would frame the rules and regulations for all the traders. So if somebody from Britain conducts trade with, say, Scandinavia, right? Those people will form a guild and they would have rules and regulations for themselves, so that they don't end up fighting with each other in the sea, because you have the problem of piracy and so many other things. So they had the guilds, and at the time they thought, why can't we? So the guilds had well-structured rules and all, and they were sharing facilities, and for example, port and all, they were sharing facilities. Godowns and warehouses, they were sharing facilities. So they said, why can't we form a kind of a single entity We individual traders, all of us have our own partnership firm, our sole proprietorship firm. Why can't we already share facilities? Why can't we take it to the next level? Because we are right now essentially competing with each other. I as a trader conduct trade between London and Scandinavia, and my neighbor is also conducting trade between London and Scandinavia, and we essentially compete with each other in the Scandinavian market, thereby giving advantage to the Scandinavian buyers. So why should we do that? Why can't we join hands and create a kind of monopoly and share the benefits or profits? So they said, okay, we will try that. So they initially formed in London, they initially formed what we today call as a company to conduct trade with Moscow. They called it as Muscovy Company. The company was Muscovy Company, and it was formed in 1553, but they had an issue. The issue is that how do we trust each other? Yeah, the guilds, they work at a particular level, but when you go to the next level, who would assure that the members of the company trust each other, or be loyal to each other? Whom do you think they can trust in this regard?
So at that time, because the feudal system, it was either the church or the king.
Yes, absolutely. They went to the king and they requested the king to issue a charter. So they said this is a big partnership firm. Some 200 people are joining or 100 people are joining. It's a big partnership firm. So you cannot necessarily call it as a partnership firm because it'll create confusion, right? Because you already have a partnership firm. Here it is big, and so they said we will say it's a company of partners. So we will call it as a company. So they called it as Muscovy Company. In 1553, they formed it in London, and then they went to the king, and they waited. The king, the monarch was, he didn't initially focus much attention on it, and then they were able to get the time with the king and explained it. Finally, the king issued a charter, a law, announcing the formation of Muscovy Company. So it was a charter, a law. So they called it this chartered company. So Muscovy Company actually formed in 1553, but officially formed in 1555, became the world's first company. It was formed to conduct, it was an extension of the guilds that they had. So this experiment was going on in parallel. On one side, the people, the London traders and the traders in Paris, the traders in Amsterdam were all worried about how to conduct trade with India. So parallelly, this experiment started happening. They initially didn't pay much attention to this, but Muscovy Company started doing relatively well, right? It was formed in, and so Muscovy Company was first formed in 1553, and then later they formed 1579. They formed Eastland Company, right? It's to conduct trade with Scandinavia and Baltic Sea nations. And then in 1581, they formed Levant Company to conduct trade with the Middle East. Levant is current day Syria and Lebanon. And then these people thought, why can't we follow the same experiment? They saw this experiment doing relatively very well, right? It is more efficient than the guilds, right? Initially, you had the guilds, international trading guilds, and they did provide an order, but now everybody is getting profits. Everybody is getting profits, and because you are not competing with each other, thereby giving the advantage to the customer, that is the Scandinavians or the Muscovites. Here you have an agreement and you have a monopoly. So these chartered companies had monopoly, and they said we will. The London traders said, why not we follow the same experiment for India as well, conducting trade with India? And they had a problem. The problem is that to conduct trade with India, you need at least 400, 500 partners. They said we will call them as shareholders. But not all the 400, 500 people can be involved in running the business. Probably 50, 60 people would be part of the business. Rest, maybe at the max 100 people would be part of the business, but another 400 people need to sit out. And how would they monitor the activities of this entity? So they said, okay, all the 400 people cannot come and sit and monitor the activities of those who are actually involved in the business. Let's have, a set of governors who will govern the corporation on our behalf. So they created what then they called as board of governors, which later become board of directors. So they said we will have a set of people who would govern the corporation or run the corporation on or monitor the corporation on our behalf. So they created board of governors, and so they are ready with the plan to form a company to conduct trade with India. So that was English East India Company, which later became British East India Company. So the English East India Company was formed on the last day of 16th century, 21st December 1600. The Queen granted a royal charter to a group of English merchants on the name Governor and the Company of Merchants of London trading with East Indies. So basically, it's, that the governor is the charter is issued to the board of governors. So later it became board of directors. So that is where, so here you need to keep in mind the board of director as a mechanism was formed to protect the interest of the shareholders who are sitting outside, those who are not part of the company. Okay. One second. I see some chats. See, there are certain questions that I'm not. There's some questions by Kanmani, and no, I'm not supposed to answer that. I'm not the right person to answer it. Okay, so let's not talk about that. Okay, I'm sure you can talk about it in the right way. Okay, so this charter awarded a newly formed company. basically this company was formed, and this charter gave a monopoly right to this newly formed company for conducting trade between England and India. So when we say India, it doesn't mean the current geographical entity or country called India. Everything east of Cape of Good Hope and and west of Straits of Magellan, all of them were called India. So it includes even the current day Indonesia. In fact, the very first ship of East India Company actually went to Indonesia. It didn't come to India to procure, obviously, the spices. So the very first ship, of course, they did later set up offices in India. India became so entire region was called India. India was not a political entity at that point in time, right? That entire geographic region was called India. And so even Indonesia, originally at the time it was called Indochina because it's a mix between India and China, and so it was called Indochina. So that is where actually the first ship of East India British, so English East India Company went there. So that charter was reviewed regularly, initially for 15 years, again and again, and then for 30 years. So finally, the company was dissolved in 1874, right, through an act, East India Stock Dividend Redemption Act. So this is how the companies came into picture, right? The companies came into picture. Is there anything that you want to clarify?
Am I audible, sir?
Yes, Kushali, please go ahead.
Hello. Am I audible,
yes, go ahead. You are audible. Go ahead.
Yeah. So my question is, with setting up of board of governors for East India Company, so did the company started with voluntarily or involuntarily choosing the stewardship model of applying ethics in business?
See, they didn't have anything. They didn't know anything about this thing. They never bothered about these theories, right? In fact, these theories didn't exist at all. They just wanted, it's a group of people. They wanted to make profit by conducting trade with India, and they know that individually they cannot do that because they didn't have enough resources, right? They cannot even borrow money from others. Even if you have a 3-member partnership, you cannot borrow money from others because the venture is very risky, right? In 21st century, a Malaysian Airlines flight can vanish in thin air. So in those days, in 16th century, the ship can vanish at any point in time. So you cannot borrow money. Nobody would lend you money. So the only way is to create something unique. So that is what they really worried about. We will join hands and form a new. They actually looked at as a partnership firm only. But since the partnership firm was restricted to 2 or 3 people, and all the partners would be active in the business, even the silent partner would have the right to walk into the office and demand the documents. So in order to differentiate their structure, all the 500 people cannot walk as and when they want and ask for the documents of the company. So they, in order to have some differing structures, they named it as company. They never worried about any theory and all. They just wanted to make money of conducting trade.
Sir, we are unable to hear you. Like your audio is very low.
My audio?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll try to. Is that fine?
Yes, sir. Now it's fine. Thank you. Got the answer.
Okay. So if it is very close, then okay. So that's objective that they had, and it's not that only England was trying to do something about it. Other European nations were also trying to do the same thing. So the next country to act in this regard was Netherlands. And Netherlands, in those days, Netherlands was a military superpower, naval superpower, or emerging naval superpower. So they also decided to come out with the same model, right? When England has invented a new model of business entity, why to reinvent the wheel? We will also follow the same thing. So they said we will form Dutch East India Company and raise funds from multiple shareholders and form Dutch East India Company. But they had a problem. The problem that they had was they couldn't get enough shareholders within Amsterdam alone, but they could get enough shareholders from other countries. If we take English East India Company, remember at the time it was only England, not Britain. English East India Company, all the shareholders of the company were traders of London or merchants of London. So they know each other very well, and if they want to sell their stake, they can always find another trader because it's all a closed network and sell the shares. But here there is a problem. There is somebody from Prussia, which is current day Germany, was also investing in the Dutch East India Company. But the problem is the merchant or the trader from Prussia is willing to put the money in Dutch East India Company, but the trader had a doubt. What if I want to sell my shares in Dutch East India Company later? Well, you can sell it to anybody, but how to find the right person? If I sell my shares, I'm a German or I'm a Prussian, and if I sell my shares into some trader in Prussia, that trader may not trust you because the jurisdiction of the company whose share I am selling is lying outside Prussia. So that trader who want to buy the shares of Dutch East India Company would not buy it from me in any cities in Prussia. He would like to buy it from me in Amsterdam. because that's where the jurisdiction of the company is. The company, the charter of the company was issued by the Dutch monarch. So, so there has to be some facility in Amsterdam to facilitate this. Or, for example, I'm a trader from Prussia. I have the shares of a Dutch East India Company. I couldn't find any buyer for my shares when I wanted to sell in Prussia. So what do? I go to Amsterdam and trying to find a seller for it. How would I find a seller? I don't have enough people. I don't have enough network. Even if I find a buyer, I give the shares I transfer the share certificates to him, but he doesn't give me the money. He cheats me. Where do I go? Or if I go to Amsterdam and buy the shares of Dutch East India Company, I pay the money to one of the potential seller, existing shareholder of Dutch East India Company. He takes the money and then says, nothing doing. He refuses to give the share certificate. So what do I do? Who would assure me the authenticity of the transaction? What do you think would be the solution? What do you think is the solution?
Sir, escrow companies?
Yes?
Escrow companies who
No?
might act as intermediaries, or the share market itself?
Yes, stock market. Stock exchanges. That's right, Apurva. And Kavya, I'll come to who gave this order? Portuguese, Dutch, English, and Denmark. Miss Kavya has put in a chat note giving the order of the companies.
So,
Where did you get this?
I have notes, sir.
No. What is the source of it? Because it's a wrong information. That's why I'm asking.
Is it? But I had my history notes, sir.
If you are talking about they coming to India, that is a different thing. Yes, Portuguese came first, Dutch people came next, and then came the English people. But if you are talking, so to that extent, this order is right. But if you are talking
Yes,
about
Entry-
companies, then the order is wrong.
I'm talking about the companies coming to India, establishing the settlements.
No. It's not about companies. Then it's about the traders. Okay.
Yes, sir. One by one, yes, sir.
Yeah, the traders are different, the companies are different, so you need to be very careful about that. Okay, so coming back to Dutch East India Company, so they decided that okay, we will set up a stock exchange which would facilitate trade between two willing actors, willing to sell and buy the shares of Dutch East India Company. So they created the world's first stock exchange, Amsterdam Stock Exchange, in 1602. So both the Dutch East India Company and Amsterdam Stock Exchange were established in the same year, 1602. So of course later then France established, and then and that's a history. So this is how the world's first companies were formed. To a greater extent, India was responsible for the innovation of companies. Of course, Muscovy Company was the first company to be formed. East India Company was not the first company. There are multiple companies that are formed before East India Company was formed. But East India Company gave a definitive shape to the entity called company. Okay, and in those days it was not a limited company, right? It's a company, basically a partnership firm with hundreds of partners. That's all. So the picture shows the headquarters of Dutch East India Company and also the symbol of Dutch East India Company. So since Dutch East India Company raised funds from traders in multiple countries, we can say that that's the first multinational company of the world. I mean, if at all the definition fits well, you can say that that's the first multinational company of the world. So later, many countries have started issuing charters. So they were all called chartered companies because they were created by a charter issued by the monarch of the respective country. So they were called chartered companies, and they had a lot of privileges. What are the privileges of those chartered companies? The chartered companies had certain characteristics, right? The chartered companies, they had the monopoly in trade. Yes, you are right. They had the monopoly in trade, and they had the right to deal with the monarchs. Okay, when English East India Company traders came and negotiated with Indian kings and emperor, Mughal emperor, typically the Mughal emperor would never strike a deal with anybody other than another monarch. So East India Company cannot come and negotiate a deal with Mughal emperor. So the Mughal emperor would enter into a deal only if the deal is struck on behalf of the English monarch. So the charter issued to the companies made them the representative of the monarch outside the territory of the particular country. So outside, whatever the deal that these companies strike were considered to be on behalf of the monarch which issued the charter. If you have watched the movie The Pirates of the Caribbean, they dwell a bit deep into that. So the East India Company is a representative of the monarch, considered to be the representative of the monarch. Otherwise, the monarchs of the distant lands like India or the small kings in Indonesia and all would not strike a deal with the company. No, it's a private entity. They would not strike a deal with a private entity. So these companies were given the right to strike deal with the monarchs on behalf of the English queen or Dutch king. They had the right to form banks. Why do you think they were given the right to form banks in the countries where they were operating?
They were donating to the king's causes. The kings had armies,
Just
and
donate the money. Now, why do you need to form a bank?
and they needed loans also sometimes to take on their pursuits of trade. So they needed some funding, right?
See, some outsider is coming and setting up a bank, and who would come and donate money to them, or who
To
would
take
you go to?
deposits of the local currency, probably.
So they would have the authority to print money.
No, they
To take the
didn't.
deposits of the local currency, maybe.
It was all the trading would happen in gold and silver only. Okay, I'll explain. The point is that if the ship from English East India Company ship comes to India, if it comes today, it's not that they would leave within a year, within a day or two. They would stay here for at least 7-8 months, sometimes even a year. Why? Because unloading, it's a huge ship. Unloading itself will take 2 months, 3 months, right? And then you need to sell the products. And you are not going to sell all the product at one go. And then you buy the product and load it on the ship. That will take another 1 month or so. So typically the ship, so if you get the product from, so how the trade would work, the ship would bring products from England, right? Come and come to the port in India, stay there, unload the products from India, sell it to the local market, Indian market, and then collect the money, and then buy the Indian goods, and then take it and load it in the ship and go to England and sell it. That is how it works. So when they come, bring the English goods and sell it in the local market, they get the money, obviously in the form of gold and silver. And they are not going to use that gold and silver for another 3-4 months. Why? Because they are going to buy Indian goods, spices only after 3-4 months, probably a month before starting their journey back to England. So till the time, what do you do with the gold, right? If you start lending that gold, that would make more money to you. So they created banks and started lending that money to the localites. So that is why they were allowed to form banks. And also, whom would they lend? It is not that they would necessarily lend to the localites. They would lend to their own employees. The employees would be coming on contract basis, right? So during in between time, the employees would also buy small things in their account and then go and sell it once they return to India. So, and employees need money to meet their local expenses over and above their salary. So, for these purposes, they were allowed to form banks, and they had the right to own, manage, and grant or distribute land. Right? They can own the land in foreign countries. They can manage the land. They can grant and distribute the land. Okay, so that is another thing, and they can have their own police force. Why do they need to have their own police force?
So since they have money and they are moving expensive goods, they would need to safeguard it.
Yeah, that's right. So remember, you are in a alien territory. You are in another country, and there is nobody who's there to protect you. Today, you are striking a deal with the local monarch, and tomorrow, if the local monarch turns against you, how would you protect yourself? So you need to have the police force. It is this class, right? They can have a police force. It is this class that Robert Clive used to capture India, to begin the capturing of India, right? In the mid 18th century, that is sometime in 1750s, he started using it. First in Madras, they had three important zones. One is Bombay, Madras, and Calcutta. So in Madras, he started interfering between the Arcot brothers, and at a smaller level, and learning that experience. With that experience, when he got transferred to Calcutta, he used it in a big way to capture territories between the local rulers. Yeah, Carnatic Wars is what I was referring to, right? So it is this class which was misused, and then they had trade monopoly. Why trade monopoly? Anyone?
Sir, again, one reason was to incentivize their companies. So if there is no monopoly and the companies going to a new country, they want some sense of security that they will be the only one to purchase or sell in a certain region. So that was one reason.
That's right. The risk is already high. The risk was already high with sea trade, right? Anything can happen. The pirates were rampant, and piracy was rampant, and then the natural calamities, then the epidemics, right? So the risk is already high with the international trade, and if you allow competition, that will effectively eat the profit, and who would benefit? The Indians or the buyers. So why allow this? So they have trade monopoly. And a question from Tanya: would not this police effectively be the police of the empire, considering that they are the agents of monarch? Yes, you are right, Ms. Tanya. They were considered to be the police of the empire only. That's
So then what's the meaning of this particular right? That's my question. If they're anyway they are police of the empire, of the monarch,
correct.
Then how does it further I don't understand the reason why this particular is
Okay, so that's a good point. See, they were considered to be the police of the empire, right? But only in paper, right? So that they can convince the other countries' monarchs. But otherwise, they were on the rolls of the East India companies, and they were answerable to the governor of East India Company, not to the monarch. Okay, so only in paper they were considered to be the police of the empire, but practically they were not the police of the empire. They were the police of the company only. They were on the rolls of the company. They were answerable to their superior within the company. They cannot bypass the governor of the company and go to the monarch directly. There is no way they can directly go to the monarch. So that is why they were allowed to have their own police force. So only in paper, for other countries, they were the empire, monarchs of, sorry, the police of the empire, not otherwise. Okay, so these are certain characteristics of the companies. It evolved over a period of time. And going back to our shareholder protection issue, there are a lot of issues with these chartered companies, right? Initially, these chartered companies were trading into trading only, no manufacturing, and the shareholders did not have what we call as limited liability. They never had it at that point, and they did not have limited liability. That is, if I borrow 5,000 rupees and then invest in East India Company, and then I lost the money from my packet, I need to pay that 5,000 rupees to the lender, right? I cannot say I lost the money in the company and you go to hell. I cannot say that. So the companies didn't have limited liability. I'm sure you know the meaning of limited liability. There's actually an interesting thing. 2-3 years back, I was conducting interview for executive MBA program. There is a person from a company. Okay, let me not name the company, a popular software company. So I asked him, the name of your company is say XYZ Limited. So what do you think is the meaning? Why do they have the term limited? He thought for a moment and said, sir, probably in our company, everything is limited. The salary that they give is limited. The bonus that they give is limited. The facilities that they give is limited. And then that's why, probably they are calling it as a limited company, right? So obviously, we didn't select him. But you know the meaning of the term limited liability, right? So there is no limited liability at that point in time. But the concept of companies started working very well, and it spread to manufacturing industries after Industrial Revolution. That is from the mid 18th century, 1750s onwards, it started spreading to manufacturing sector as well. So the industrialists started forming companies to set up huge factories, rice farms, and set up huge factories. And so once Industrial Revolution started happening, there is a huge competition between the kingdoms of European kingdoms. Everybody wanted to industrialize as quickly as possible. Particularly France realized that there is always a competition between France and Britain. By the time it became Britain, with Scotland and England joining hands and forming United Kingdom, and then later Ireland also joined. So there is a competition between the European kingdoms to industrialize their nations. So they were looking in for ways to increase the industrial activity. So one thing that they realize is that you need to have more people investing money in setting up factories, and for that they need to create companies. And if they have to create company, there's a problem. The problem is that people have unlimited liability. So they said, so Napoleon Bonaparte introduced. Napoleon realized that if you bring in the concept of limited liability, more people would be encouraged to put their money. If I invest 1,000 rupees and if I have limited liability, my loss would be limited to that, whatever money that I invested. So more people, whenever they have surplus, would be willing to invest their money in company. So Napoleon Bonaparte was the first monarch to introduce the concept of limited liability in 1807. And in 1807, most of the Western Europe at least was under French control, and hence it went everywhere. And so that is the civil law version of limited liability. I'm sure you heard about civil law system and common law system in your business law course. So this is the civil law version of limited liability. And the common law version of limited liability was introduced not in UK, but in USA, particularly the state of New York, brought in general limited liability for the manufacturing companies. And very quickly, the other states of US also have adopted it. It's not that limited liability was a completely new concept. The concept of limited liability was there even during the Roman Empire period, right? But it was a very limited version of the limited liability, in the sense that if you are borrowing money and you lose the money because of natural calamities, then you don't need to repay. Okay, so that is a very limited version of limited liability during the Roman Empire period. But it was not a universal limited liability, right? So it was there even for partnership firm during Roman Empire period. Still, it was not a universal version, universal limited liability. One, if you lose money because of natural calamities which are beyond your control, then you are not liable to pay. Your losses are limited to your original investment. So so very quickly other countries have adopted it. So Britain felt that we are Kanmani Rajshekhar is asking, can you explain civil law and not formal law, civil law and common law? Can anyone explain the difference between civil law and common law? I don't want to deviate a law, but if required, I will explain because that's very important. The understanding of it is very important. Can anyone explain the difference between civil law and common law?
So I thought that civil law was applicable to all citizens, and the other law was special laws were applicable to people who were in army or government.
No, certainly not. Civil other is common law. One second. So civil law and common law. So civil law is the law based on, see, at the end of the day, the legal systems are based on the religions, right? Civil law is based on the Catholic system, and the common law is based on the Protestant. There are three predominant legal systems across the world: common law, civil law, and Islamic law. But here we are worried about civil law and common law. Common law is followed in based on Protestant Christianity. It is followed in the countries which are once ruled by Britain, including India. Right? India also follow common law system. And civil law, there are multiple variations. You have German civil law, you have French civil law, you have Scandinavian civil law. Let's not get into those things, but civil law is followed in the countries which originated from. It's not that it's followed, originated from the countries which are following Catholic Christianity. The basic difference is that I'm not sure how to do that. Okay, I'll explain it simply. In India, let us say there is a murder case. Okay, follow me carefully and then stop me if you are unable to understand. Remember, I'm not a law faculty, right? So I'm trying to simplify it as much as possible. What I say is the simplified version. It may not exactly be correct, but this is the underlying theme of it. If a murder case is happening, where does the trial happen? The trial happens in the district courts, right? The trial happens in the district court. The witnesses are called to testify. The evidences are presented before the district court judge. So the trial happens in the district court. And so if it is a murder case, and let us assume the trial court judge gives a death penalty, and the accused or the convicted person appeals against it in a high court. So in high court, no trial happens. Only the lawyers argue based on the evidences that are already submitted or witnesses who are already testified in the trial court. And still, the High Court may give a different verdict. How do you think that happens? Right? The High Court may give a different verdict. The High Court may reduce the sentence to, say, life imprisonment. So why do you think it happens? That is the beauty of common law. Have you ever seen, how the lawyers argue their case in High Court or in Supreme Court?
Yes, sir.
What do they say? How do they argue? They always quote the judgments in previous cases. They say, Government of India versus XYZ in 1964, the Supreme Court said so and so. So it is based on precedences. Yeah. So basically, the law says that if a murder happens, then you can give death penalty under section so and so. You can give life imprisonment, and another section you can give 7 years RI, rigorous imprisonment, in another section, or you can give 3 years RI if it is done to safeguard oneself. So the law simply says these are the sections under which you can give the verdict if the murder is accused as proven to be the person who committed the crime. It leaves the freedom to the judges to decide what is the right thing to apply, right punishment to apply based on precedences. That's why they would keep on calling the judges as the learned judges. It doesn't mean that others are not learned. It means that this is the right, so in 1964 the Supreme Court said in a similar case this is the verdict, right? And hence this case is also very similar to that, and hence you have to give the same verdict. That is how they argue. So the judges decide the punishment for the murder case based on the severity of this case and comparing it with the severity of another case, a similar case for which the Supreme Court has given a verdict earlier, right? So it is based on the precedences. That is common law.
Okay.
The civil law is a codified law. Of course, all the laws are codified. Civil law is specifically called codified law, as Pranay mentioned. It actually defines the situation as well. I'm putting it very crudely. Okay, I may not be exactly right. If the crime happened in scenario 1, then the punishment is P1. If the crime happened in scenario 2, then the punishment is P2. If crime happened in scenario 3, the punishment is P3. It codifies the scenario as well. It codifies the scenario as well. So the role of the judge is to fit in the given situation to any one of the situations described or codified in the law. And once he fits in, then the punishment becomes automatic. Okay. So you may ask a question. How is it possible? Is it possible to define all the situation? No, it is not possible to define all the situation. So that is where there is some discretion to the judge. But remember, this is based on the Catholic system. Remember, the church has enormous influence on the people. I'm talking about pre-medieval period. The church has enormous influence on the people's life. The church dictated how people should live their life. So this is how you need to live your life. That is how the church dictated. So the possible deviations can always be codified. Okay, the possible deviations can always be codified, and hence it becomes a codified law. On the other hand, the Protestant Christianity approach is a bit different. The Protestant Christianity approach is like, basically these are the things that you should not do. Other than that, you can do whatever you want. These are the things which are sins, according to Protestant church. I mean, I'm talking about the 14th and 15th century medieval period church. So do not confuse it with what we have today. Vatican reformed itself multiple times. So what I talk is what provided during that period. So basically, the Protestant church said these are the things that you should not do. Other than do whatever you want. Give the freedom. The personal ethics is more important. I will not tell you how you should live the life. It's up to you. You be loyal to God, and hence you would be, the personal ethics, work ethics, and all those things related to the path of capitalism. Basically, you are allowed to do things as long as you do not you do not do the things which are prevented. Okay. So what happens here is that it is not possible to codify the possible violation. So it simply, in fact, that is one of the reasons why industrial revolution happened in England rather than in anywhere else, right? There are multiple reasons. I won't attribute this as the only reason, but industrial revolution happened in England, and one of the main reasons is that England was following Protestant Christianity, which allowed people to experiment. Right. On the other hand, in Catholic countries in those days, people didn't have much of freedom. There are multiple reasons for industrial revolution happening in England. In fact, England and Scotland joining hands together and forming a united kingdom is also one of the reasons, because till that point in time, England was fighting wars with Scotland. Right. They kept on fighting. You would have watched the movie, The Broken. What is that? What is the movie? William Wallace, I forget it, the award-winning movie. Okay, so basically the English people and Scottish people kept fighting, and suddenly in 707, they joined hands and formed a united kingdom. So the people, many people who are employed in army become jobless, and they didn't have enough money, but they don't know what to do. So they started experimenting new things. So these are Braveheart. Yes, Braveheart. There are multiple reasons why England had industrial revolution, mother of industrial revolution, and not France, or not Netherlands, or not Portuguese. In fact, Portuguese were the very rich people at that point in time, because they had plenty of wealth. They had a monopoly of trade with in Indian Ocean at that point in time. Okay, so coming back to this, so that is the difference between civil law and common law. So basically, when I say common law, they get codified. The limited liability got codified in it. And so when you come to civil, that is in civil law. When it comes to common law, the approach to be adopted is different. Okay, what we will do is I'll just ask you a question, and we'll take a break. The question is, which system, civil law system or common law system, which system is good for business? Which one is good for business? Think about it. And we will start with this question, answering this question after the break. Okay, and you need to explain why. Okay, fine. You don't need to leave. I'm not going to leave, right? I'm just going to close my video. You can go, but you don't need to log out, is what I meant. Okay, so please pay attention. Let's return to the question. So which legal system is better among the two? Let's not talk about Islamic law, because their approach of business is a bit different. We don't have interest for loans and all, so that's a different thing altogether.
So common law, in my opinion, would be better.
Why do you say so?
Sir, because as you said, in civil law, there are a lot of predefined situations and what is to be done when and what is not to be done when. Whereas when we talk about businesses, they thrive on innovation, and it is simply impossible to list down all the possible scenarios. 10-15 years ago, nobody even knew Uber or Airbnb would be something that would succeed. So
Right.
common law, since it works on precedences, it is more contextual and it will be more relevant as we progress in times.
That's right. That's right. That's very right, Vaibhav. Common law is good as far as business is concerned, because it encourages innovation. That is why you see the business innovations are happening predominantly predominantly happening in common law countries. US is also following common law country because it was once ruled by Britain. So the common law countries, a lot of business innovations happen. The civil law countries, the innovation, I'm talking about business innovations. I'm not talking about inventions. Inventions do happen in European countries. And for your information, even Japan and Korea, they also follow civil law system only. Particularly Japan follows civil law system because Japanese legal system is based on the German civil law system. If you have watched the movie The Last Samurai, where they explain that the king or the emperor brings in experts from Germany to design the systems, etc. So essentially, the Japanese legal system is based on the German civil law system. So that is why most of the major business innovations happen in UK or US or Australia, the civil common law countries. For example, internet was actually invented by the Europeans at CERN, the big laboratory, but that became a commercial product with US. US made it as a commercial product. Okay, so to that extent, common law is better as far as business is concerned.
Sir, is it possible to have a blended one, that is part of civil law and part of common law?
See, the underlying principle is very important. It's very, very, very difficult to change it. Right here, you argue based on the precedences, right? That is why, if you take Canada for example, Canada is Canada overall follows common law system because Canada was under the British control. But there is one province in Canada, or the state in Canada, Quebec, follows civil law system because it was under French control for a long time. Now, why didn't they try to change it? Because if they try to change it, it's going to be disastrous. So it is not possible to mix it. Even take Hong Kong for example. Right? China follows civil law system, whereas Hong Kong follows common law system. So even when China trying to take over Hong Kong's political control completely, they are not trying to change the legal system, because changing the legal system is going to be disastrous. And if you try to mix it, it is going to be further disastrous. I am not a law expert to explain in detail why it is so, but it is not practically possible. And in the Islamic countries, if you take Malaysia, for example, to certain extent, they do mix. In the sense, if you take Malaysia, the personal law is based on Sharia. Okay. Whereas the rest of the law is based on British common law, because Malaysia was under British common law. Same is the case with Pakistan. Pakistan's predominant legal system is common law system, British common law, but their personal law is based on Sharia. Same is the case with India as well. Indian Marriages Act and all is not based on common law. It is based on the Hindu laws. So to that extent, it is possible to mix, right? But within the business law, some of the laws are based on common law, some laws are based on civil law. That is not possible. Is that clear? Okay. Now, getting back to our original discussion.
Sir?
Yes.
So according to me, civil law is better because of the predictability, and the law can always be amended. For example, Bible spoke about the e-commerce, the Uber and all. And recently, Consumer Act was amended to include in the existing codified law to e-commerce business. In case they cheat and all, that would be included. And codified means that even the business will be assured that this is not wrong, this is not right. We can go ahead. So whatever happens in the future will happen. At least there is some predictability. And the next thing, the retrospective laws are always dangerous. For example, recently, the family law got amended. Like the woman was given equal share. Now the companies will be like this is just an example. So now the companies will be like, this so much unpredictable. Today I have to give share to my sister who did nothing in the company. So like this unpredictability is not always appreciated by the businesses.
Okay, no, you need to take my, generalization. It's not a very general statement I make. I never said civil law is bad for business. Okay, I simply observed that common law encourages innovation. That's all. No way I'm telling that civil law is bad for business, right? Civil law is also good, as you rightly pointed out. It does bring in predictability, but innovation thrives when you have freedom. I'll give a simple example, even though we are slightly deviating. It's fine. I'll give a small example. In I think in 1994 or 93 or 94, right? The Indian stock market was yet to recover from the Harshad Mehta scandal. People lost confidence in the stock market. Nobody was willing to invest. And at the time, that is, IPOs have dried up completely. At the time, Dhirubhai Ambani comes up with the IPO, with an issue. Everybody said, why are you going for it? Basically, it is for the Reliance Petroleum, the newly promoted company to set up refinery at Jamnagar. So everybody said that, why are you coming out with an IPO at this junction? Nobody is going to suffer. Nobody is going to subscribe, and that is in the beginning of 90. And nobody is going to subscribe. You are going to be in a serious trouble, and all those things. But he come out with an IPO in a unique manner. It is a triple option convertible debentures. Right? When you're buying, it's actually a debenture. Later, it gets converted. It gives 3 options. It's extremely innovative financial instrument. Right? It got oversubscribed. Today we apply for IPO online. In those days, the underwriters of that issue, their officers were, when the officers were flooded with, queues of people, at least a day in advance, everybody wanted to apply for it. It was a big news in 1993. There is a 2-kilometer queue in front of that underwriter who was supposed to issue the forms for subscribing to the triple option convertible debenture. So the point is that triple option convertible debenture was an extremely innovative instrument. In no way it is covered by the law. Now, if such an instrument was released in a civil law country, nobody would have subscribed to that. That innovation would have got killed even before it was introduced in the market. Nobody would have subscribed, because with that instrument, if Ambani comes out with an instrument and if you subscribe to that and Ambani takes the money and run away, what will happen to your money? You cannot file a case because that situation is not described as a crime in the law. You need to create a people's movement to make that as a illegal thing, and then only you can seek justice. So this kind of innovation, so nobody would have invested in it. Because if you invest and then if Ambani takes the money and run away, what do we do? Legally, there is no provision. Legally, that is not described as a crime. Whereas in a common law system, which India is, the judges take some precedences somewhere and then apply here because they are the learned judges. They have the freedom to do that, right? So that is why I say, innovation is encouraged. Again, I'm not making a sweeping statement. You don't mistake me for, don't make this as a sweeping. It is not a sweeping statement. I'm not at all telling that civil law is bad for business. No. Okay. As you rightly pointed out, civil law has predictability, which is good for business. But it also has its own limitation, that is innovation. Japan, for example, why didn't they know? They were leading the world in the business in the 80s. Why didn't they, come out with innovations? Didn't they have the money? No, they did. Why didn't they come out with the innovation, innovative business practices? Why the software companies were not born in Japan? Kanban system and all those systems are good. Why didn't they try to digitalize it and come out with the software companies to facilitate it? Why should some Oracle, an American company, need to come out with all those things? Why Silicon Valley is in USA, not in Tokyo? Right? So that is because now it's not that now Japan doesn't. Now Japan does have many software companies, right? They did come out with the online games, or sorry, the digital games system and all. But that happened after the IT industry got stabilized, software industry got stabilized. So, well, let's not deviate much. Let's get back to the companies. Okay. So then we were talking about limited liabilities. So French took the initiative, and Britain did not want to be left behind. They were also breaking their head. What can we do to encourage more investment in our territory, industrial investment in our territory? The most important condition is that you need to have companies. So how to encourage more companies to come up in our territory? So they have, France adopted limited liability. We will do something else. So they break their head and they come out with a very interesting idea. Until that point in time, if you want to start a company, you need to go to the monarch and ask the monarch to issue a charter indicating the formation of the company. So Britain said, why should the people come to the monarch? Because by the time the content of most of the charter, for each company there will be a charter, and the content of the charters were more or less standardized. So they said, why should people come to the monarch to form companies? Right? Monarch has multiple responsibilities, and so if they come to monarch, it actually delays the process of forming the company. So let's do away with this practice. So what do you think they would have done? What do you think they would have done? If you want to do away with the practice of chartered companies, what do you think? Sorry, charters? Register of Companies. They come out with world's first Companies Act, under which anybody can come. In 1844, Britain introduced the limited liability only in 1855, but in 1844 they come out with first Companies Act of the world, British Companies Act. So the Companies Act simply said you don't need to come to the monarch. Monarch is a busy person, so you just go to the Register of Companies. We will create an umbrella act called the British Companies Act, and anybody can create the company by registering themselves with the Register of Companies. It becomes very easier. It becomes very easier to create companies, so more investments can come. Then subsequently, they addressed another problem facing the companies. So they call it as joint stock company. In the Companies Act, British Companies Act, called it as joint stock company, which is the name it still provides. And they also introduced limited liability after 10 years, 11 years. There is another problem with the companies. The problem with the companies is that if there are 500 shareholders, probably 50 shareholders manage the company. In the management of the company is with the 50 shareholders. Yes, you have board of directors who monitor the performance of the company, and the profit that they make from the company need to be shared between all the shareholders. That and all is fine. But how do they calculate the profit? Right? The managers can always prepare the accounts in such a way that it is actually showing very low profit. Because the operations of the business are so complex that you can prepare accounts in your own way. And hence, this is particularly true with the manufacturing companies. Right? Trading, the way you prepare the account was the double entry bookkeeping and all those things are there. But here, it becomes a bit complex. So the British government realized that the managers tend to cheat the outside shareholders because they prepare the accounts in the way they want. So what is the solution? Linking salaries to the profit. Accounting standards, yes, Chitrangora. Accounting standards, they come out with accounting standards and created a new profession called auditing. They said every company need to prepare the accounts as per the standard accounting principles. You cannot prepare till that point in time. Till that point in time, companies are preparing accounts in the way they want. So this Companies Act also talked about accounting standards and created a new profession called auditing. So every year, the companies need to get their accounts audited by the external statutory auditors. The statutory auditors need to certify that the company has prepared the accounts in line with the accounting standards. Right? So that gave more confidence to the shareholders to put their money in the company. So there is a lot of competition. Let's not get deep into that. So finally, the corporate form evolved at the end of 19th century. And in the 20th century, even though you had plenty of variations across the countries, in 20th century, there are certain things which are common for all the companies across the countries. One is limited liability. We all know what it is. Second is transferability. Transferability means in the olden days, if you are a shareholder of a company and if you are selling your share to somebody else, you can sell it, but you need to get the approval for your transaction from other shareholders in the annual general. So basically, if somebody has any objection, some of the other shareholders have any objection to you selling it to another person, then they have the right to buy it from you. They can demand that you sell it to me. I'm another shareholder. You cannot sell it to a third person, sell it to me. They have the right. You cannot sell it as per your whims and fancies. You need to get the approval of the other shareholders in the annual general meeting. But in the 20th century, all those things are gone. You can just like that go and sell the stock. It emerged in the mid 19th century itself, and you can today you don't need to seek anybody's permission if you want to sell your shares to somebody. You just need to inform the company. In fact, that the stock market would take care of. So that is transferability. It is freely transferable, and the company is a legal person. Initially, the companies were not legal persons. Right, so the assets were held in the joint name of all the people, right? But now the companies are legal personalities. They can buy assets, they can sell assets, they can sue others. They can also be sued. In that, they are artificial persons in the eyes of the law, and the company is a perpetual entity. In the olden days, remember when we saw the charter of British East India Company, the charter said the company has a life of 15 years. So the chartered companies have a definitive life period. At the end of that particular period, you need to liquidate the company and give the money back to the shareholders, or you need to get another charter issued to extend the lifetime. So East India Company's charter was extended again and again and again till 1870. But the companies of modern days are perpetual entities. Unless they are wound up by the action of the law, they would continue to exist. Right? Unless they are wound up by the action of the law, they would continue to exist. So they are perpetual entity. This sometimes create problems also. Right? And finally, the central management. What is the meaning of central management? Let's say I invest, say, 2,000 rupees or 20,000 rupees in Infosys, right? It's my money. I'm giving to Infosys company. I let us assume Infosys comes out with an IPO and I give the money. Let's say 20,000 rupees I invest. Now, which means I'm one of the owners. Now, can I dictate terms to the management as to how they should use the money? No. It is once I give the money to them, it's completely up to them. What do they do with it? Of course, they would have mentioned about it in the documents, but I cannot dictate terms to them. It is my money, but still I can forget about participating in the management. If I invested 20,000 in Infosys, I can't even go to Infosys campus, without having a proper reason. They would not let me in to get inside the campus. Forget about participating in management decision-making process. Right? I cannot go to the security of Infosys head office in Bangalore and say, see, I'm one of the owner, let me in. They would say, get lost. Right? So it's my company, I am one of the owners, but I'm not allowed to get it. Forget about participating in management process. Right? So that is what we mean by central management. There is somebody who takes the decision. I don't have any role in it, a very limited role in it. It's not that I don't have any role. I have a very limited role in it. And so these are the characteristics of the corporations of the 20th century. Okay, so far we talked about the emergence of corporate form. The next thing that we are going to talk, so remember, there are two things that we need to discuss before understand corporate governance, right? So for corporate governance, there are two things. One is the corporate history. Another one is ownership. These two things are important to understand what we call as CG. Okay, so we talked about history briefly. Now we need to talk about ownership structure. So the next thing we are going to discuss is the ownership structure. So who are the owners of the companies? I'm only worried about companies, right? Of course, any business entity, whom do you think are the owners? Forget about companies for the time being. Whom do you think are the owners of any company across the world?
Founders.
Yeah, founders are, who are the founders? Founders are the private people. Okay, then who else?
Shareholders can be
Yeah,
companies,
who are the shareholders is my question.
individuals, corporations, any legal entities.
Okay, so basically, who can be the owner? Typically, the families started the business. The business families started the business. In fact, even today, if you take the Fortune 500 companies, 35% of the Fortune 500 companies are controlled by the families, business families. So typically, the business firms are promoted and controlled by the business families. But it's not just the business families. You have other types of controlling owners also. The other types of controlling owners are okay. Before getting into that, which is the oldest known business entity as of today? Any guess? Oldest surviving family-owned business. Take a guess. And when do you think it was formed? Vadias, that's in India. It's a Japanese company. Any guess? You are right, Priya. 1 or 3 years old. Oh, come on. Tata itself is 150 years old or 160 years old. In fact, Vadia is the right answer for India. Even though Vadias, when they formed business entity, it was not a company. That's right. That's good. I think you guys are searching for it. Okay, but till 10 years or 12 years ago, the oldest oldest family controlled business of the world was a company called Kungo Kumi. Right, Kungo Kumi was founded in 578 AD, and it was in the business of constructing temples. Actually, it was founded by two brothers who were personally invited by the Japanese emperor in 570 AD from Korea. Right, they came to Japan and they founded the company. Well, it was not a company at that point in time. They found a partnership firm to construct temples in Japan on the invitation of the Japanese emperor, and it continued to thrive, right, for centuries. And after major restoration, they diversified into commercial construction, but still, temple construction accounted for 80% of their revenue. And on the right side is a note about that company in Time Asia magazine, right? Just have a look at it. But unfortunately, in January 2007, due to debt problem, the promoters or the founding family sold the company to bigger company called Takamatsu. So it is still there, but it's a subsidiary. It's no more a family-owned entity. It is no more an independent entity. So as of now, the the oldest company are Hoshi Ryokan, and there is also another company, Nishiyama Onsen Quinken. Both are hotels basically. They are the oldest surviving business entities, right? We give both the names because there is debate about which is the oldest. One person says that Hoshi Ryokan has the records from 708. Nishiyama Honsen Winton, they don't have enough records, but still they also not from 705, even though they claim it to be 705. So that is the two oldest surviving business entities. And if you could take, Japan is the home to more than 50% of the top 100 oldest business entities. Why? Because of the Japanese traditions. Okay. So this is that, and apart from the family, you can also have the government as the owner of the business, right? If you take BHEL, Bharat Heavy Electricals Limited is the government, LIC, it is the government. They are also companies, but the controlling owner is the government. Or it can be multinational company, right? If you take Cummins India, Cummins Incorporated, the parent company from US, is the controlling owner. There are other owners, but I'm talking only about the controlling owner. Then you can have the institutional investors. If you take L&T or ITC, institutional investors have the significant stake, even though they don't directly control it. So these are the majority stake owners or controlling stake owners in any business entity across the world. Is there anything that you want to clarify? I keep on talking, not much of discussion is happening.
Sir, meanwhile, I had a question regarding the perpetual entity.
Okay.
So, in case if a company is being given a perpetual entity, so are we not asked? Is there is a potential chance that it can turn out to be a monopoly?
I'm not getting your question. I'm sorry.
So, sir, if a company, if we are allowing companies to be perpetual entities, so they can develop.
All companies are perpetual entities by definition, Shivani. That means it doesn't mean that it means basically the company need to be wound up by an action of the court of law to make it extinct. It doesn't mean that it will continue forever, right? If you want to wind up a company, you need to file it in olden days. You need to file a specific case in the court. Nowadays, you can file for bankruptcy. Okay, so it does not mean that the company would continue forever. It means it does not cease to exist automatically. If you want to wind up a company or liquidate a company, you need to take a specific action by filing for bankruptcy, which is now the process. Earlier, before bankruptcy law was enacted, if you want to wind up a company, you need to file a specific application in the court that I want to liquidate the company. The court would take up its own sweet time and then order the liquidation of the company. So it does not mean, where perpetual entity does not mean it will continue to exist forever. It simply means you need to take a specific measure if you want to liquidate the company. If you don't take that measure, the company would continue to exist. There is a company called IDPL, Indian Drugs and Pharmaceutical Limited, which is predominantly based in Hyderabad, even though they also have some operations and used to have operations in Delhi. In fact, that company, the people who worked in that company made Hyderabad as a pharma capital of India, because they quit the company and then started their own pharma company, and it became very big, including Dr. Ranji Reddy of Dr. Reddy's lab. All of them were worked with IDPL, Indian Drugs and Pharmaceutical Company. So all these people quit and IDPL become practically bankrupt. But what happened was the government, it's a government company, so the government did not file a separate petition in the court of law to seek the liquidation of the company, because it's a government company. If you liquidate it, it's you know, it will result in a lot of employment losses and all. So that company still exists in paper. It owns huge land assets in Hyderabad, you know, in an area called Balanagar. If you know the Hyderabad area, Balanagar, it owns huge tracts of land. It remained unutilized. I don't know whether they started using it now. You know, the information that I have is at least 4 or 5 years old. But the land remains unutilized, and they still have an MD. I met that MD. I mean, the MD some 7 or 8 years ago. I mean, at the time, whoever was the MD, I met him. He said, "What do you do? You know?" He says, "I still visit the office. There is something called MD's office. I visit the office. There are some, you know, because we are a government company, we need to sign a lot of documents. I do that, and the company employees also come. There are around 150 employees at the time. They also come, sign, and go, right? And so that is how it, because, you know, what else to do? The government has not initiated the process of liquidating the company. So the company continued to exist, IDPL. They did try to revive some manufacturing, but it didn't work out. So that is the problem with the perpetual entity. It doesn't mean that it will exist forever. I hope I clarified that. Anything else? Okay. You can also type the question. I know I have a tablet or a laptop on the side, and I keep checking the chat window there. So, okay. Now, how various countries look, various companies in various countries look with their ownership structure of the companies. So a survey was done in 1997. So to that extent, it's an old survey, but still, whatever the findings of that survey is valid as far as ownership is concerned. So this was the finding of that survey. This survey by Laporta and others tried to map the ownership pattern of the big companies across the world, and they only took the rich countries, not the developing countries. So India and China do not figure in this. And so they said a particular company is considered to be. Yes.
In what year was this survey done?
1997.
Which year?
1997.
Okay.
Of course, if you want, I think the paper is available as your reading material. I have made it available to you in the. Okay, so if you want to know the more details, you can read through the paper. Of course, it's a research paper, so it might be a bit boring. So they considered a company to be controlled by a family or any other entity if that particular entity has more than 10% stake. Okay. So if a family controls more than 10% stake in a company, then they assume that that company is controlled by that particular business family. If a government is, if the government has more than 10% stake in the company, and if nobody else has, right, you know, more than 10% stake, then it is considered to be a government company, and so on. So this is the survey of the company. So here I have given only two parameters: widely held and family owned. Widely held company means there are no identified controlling shareholder for the company. Nobody has more than 10% stake, and hence nobody is assumed to be in control of that particular company. So such companies are called widely held companies. So if you look in here, it throws interesting things, right? US and UK, the companies have 90% of the companies are widely held in UK, 80% of the companies are widely held in UK. And if we can come to Mexico, right, all the companies, 100% of the companies are controlled by business families, right? The other countries fall in between. And if it is for the bigger firms, they said, okay, let's move to the medium-sized firms, and that is the fine. This is the finding for medium-sized firm, which is also very similar. Now the question is, why this pattern? Okay, so and if you look in Japan, that is another interesting point. If you look in Japan, only 30% of the only 10% of the companies are controlled by families. Even in the bigger company, only 10% of the companies are controlled by families, and 50% of them are widely held. Why is this? We know that in Japan, the families control the business, but still here in this data, it's not reflecting. So how the families are controlling the business if they do not have 10% stake, and why that happened? So that is what we are going to understand now, right? So we are going to understand why a particular shareholding structure evolved in two countries, right? One is Japan, which is what we are going to discuss first, and then USA. Okay, so we know that in Japan the families control the business, but it's not reflecting here. According to this research work, only 10% of the big businesses are controlled by families, and 50% of them are 50% of the big companies are widely held. In the sense, there are no identified controlling shareholder who has more than 10% stake. Now, why do you think this has happened? Okay, so why do
Sir, I had a question.
Yeah.
So when we are talking about this, we are talking about share ownership or the voting rights.
Here we are talking about share ownership.
Share ownership. Thank you, sir.
You are right. I understand what you want to say. We will touch upon it later. Okay. Okay. Why do you think this happened in Japan? So in Japan, during Second World War, Japan had what we call as Zaibatsus. The Zaibatsus were the powerful business families or business groups that controlled the business entities in Japan prior to World War II. Okay, the 14 powerful Zaibatsus controlled 25% of the business assets in Japan prior to World War II. The prominent Zaibatsus were Mitsui, Mitsubishi, and Sumitomo, right? One of the 3 of the 14. These Zaibatsus were very powerful. Now, what happened to these Zaibatsus? So, typical Zaibatsu structure looked like this. There will be a holding company. This is the holding company, and this would be 100% controlled by the family. Okay, this is 100% controlled by the family. And this holding company would have 50% stake, minimum 50% stake in multiple companies, right? Business 1, business 2. There will also be a bank. Invariably, there will be a bank. And okay, so they would have 50% stake. The holding company would have 50% stake in it. This is how the structure was prior to World War II. And after World War II, General MacArthur-led administration took over the administration of Japan, and the American administration realized that one of the main reasons as to why Japan was able to do so many atrocities, or able to win so many wars during World War II. Remember, Japan is a small country, right? Can you imagine today Sri Lanka winning a war against India? Impossible, right? But that is how it happened during World War II. Japan, a small country, was able to sweep away a Chinese empire in World War II. Right? China, such a big country, was humiliated by Japan. Japan defeated. The reason, one of the main reasons, this is not the only reason, one of the main reasons is that these Zaibatsus provided tremendous support, both monetary as well as product level support. Whatever product the government wants, they would manufacture it and give it to government. Whatever money the government wants, these Zaibatsu families would give the money from their profit to the government. So these Zaibatsus played a crucial role in Japanese success in World War II. So this really angered them, American administration. So they said, let's not allow this to repeat. Let's abolish the Zaibatsu system. So what they did was, they simply abolished the holding companies. The holding companies were all abolished, and they said the 50% or more than 50% holding or shareholding by the holding company in B1, in B2 and the bank and B4 would be given to the employees at a rock bottom price. So the Zaibatsu family was left with no money. Their holding company was simply abolished. Now the problem is, there is also one more aspect, one more way through which the families exerted control over them. The CEOs or MDs of this B1 or the B2 or the bank or B4 were also from the Zaibatsu families. Right? Mitsui family not only owned the Mitsui holding company, but Mitsui family members were the CEOs in their businesses as well. Now, even though the American administration has abolished the holding company, thereby depriving the Zaibatsu families of their ownership in the companies, they did not remove the top managerial personnel from these companies who were all from the family. Why did they remove? They realized that if we suddenly remove the top managerial personnel of the family from the companies, there would be a vacuum in the company, and that would be disastrous for the Japanese economy. Because the companies would become headless. You cannot just like that find. Remember, I'm talking about late 1940s. You don't have MBA colleges which produces managers, you didn't have in those days, or very limited number only they had. So you need to know the people who know how to run the business. So these Zaibatsu family members were not removed from the top managerial positions in the companies, but the holding companies were abolished. So they lost their ownership control, but they retained their managerial control. The shareholding, the 50% shareholding of the holding company in the companies were given to the employees. This continued for nearly 10 years. So by late 50s, late 40s, 1940s, the holding companies were abolished, but the companies were continued to be controlled by the Zaibatsu family members. But early 60s, the employees, when they wanted to sell their stake and get out, they couldn't find enough buyers. Very limited buyers were available for their shares in the stock market. At that time, the controlling managers who are from Zaibatsu families come out with an interesting idea. See, when this holding companies was abolished, they also come out with the law which said that basically they wanted to prevent the re-emergence of the holding company. So the law said that no entity can hold more than 5% stake in another entity. Basically to ensure that nobody becomes a holding company later. So what these people did was, they said, okay, the employees, many people want to sell the share, they're getting very low price in the stock market because of the demand supply situation. So why can't we use this situation? Yes, as a family member, individually, I don't have money because my shareholding, family shareholding in holding companies were abolished. But the company that I control, say B, has plenty of surplus. Because made a lot of money in post-war reconstruction. I will use that money to buy stake in B2, my sister company, Eastwell sister company. So B1, and similarly B2 said, I will buy stake in B1, and I'll buy stake in the bank, I'll buy stake in B4. And B1 would buy it in B2, bank, and B4. B4 would buy it in B1, B2, and bank. Bank would buy it in all the companies. So, and remember the limit, upper limit was 5%. So they started buying stake in the company, right? B1 would buy it in B2, bank, and then B4. Then B2 would buy it in B1, then it will buy it in bank, and then B4, and B4 would buy it in the bank. Here like this. So this resulted in a complex cross-holding structure, which, so now what happened? The family's control is back even through ownership. Even though none of the family members directly control more than 5% stake, together the family controls everything. And also the family started investing in the other family companies as well to basically protect them. So Mitsui, for example, has stake in Toyota. In fact, in Toyota family, in Toyota, more than Toyota, I think Mitsui has more stake. So they have a lot of cross-holding even within the groups as well, between the groups as well. So that resulted in what we call as the Kairetsu structure. The Kairetsu structure evolved in Japan post World War II. Is there anything? So that is what we have even today. In early 90s, 1991, the Japanese government amended the law and said that now you can have more than 5% stake, even more than 10% stake in other companies. So some companies, some families and some companies started increasing their stake in other companies, other sister companies beyond 10%. Still, it's only limited in very limited in number, and that is why you have only 10% of them have more than 10%. Only 10% of them have more than 10% stake, to be considered as a family-owned company. So 50% of them still remain widely held company. Is there anything that you want to clarify? Okay. Why? There is another interesting question that yeah, we still have time. Oh, yeah, we have time. Can you identify a company without controlling shareholder in India in non-banking sector? There are probably 2 or 3 companies. You can use the chat window or you can answer. Company without a controlling shareholder outside banking sector. Yes, Piyush Singh is right. L&T. You have only 2 more.
Sir, can you repeat the question, sir?
Identify a company without a controlling shareholder in India. Infosys, good, and there is one more. In the non-banking sector, banks by law do not have controlling shareholder most of the time. HDFC Bank or ICICI Bank, right, or Axis Bank, they do not have an identified shareholder, a controlling shareholder. There's one more, ITC. There are only 3 companies, right? L&T, Infosys, and ITC. Yes, Abhishek, you are right. On the other hand, so all other companies in India, they have an identified controlling shareholder. The controlling shareholder could be a family, could be government, could be a multinational company, but you do have an identified controlling shareholder. If you take United States, right? If you take United States, for example, this shows that 90% of the companies do not have an identified promoter or controlling shareholder. Why do you think this happened in US? If you take, for example, all the companies in US are also started by families only. If you take, say, AT&T, right? AT&T was founded by Alexander Graham Bell, the man who invented telephone. What about the shareholding of AT&T? What about the shareholding of Bell family in AT&T today? It's nothing. General Electric, one of the most celebrated company, it was founded by Thomas Alva Edison. And what is the shareholding of Thomas Alva Edison family today in General Electric? Nothing, right? Or if you take Walt Disney, right? The largest shareholder in Walt Disney today is not Apple, but Steve Jobs family. Not Apple, Steve Jobs family. Okay, so it is because Steve Jobs sold his company Pixel to Walt Disney through share swapping agreement. So he ended up getting 7% stake in Walt Disney. It is not the Disney family. Disney family stake in Walt Disney is less than 2% today. Right. So the question is, why did this happen in the United States? Why the shareholding of the founding family is negligible? There are still some business entities which are companies which are still controlled by families. Right. For example, Walmart is still controlled by Sam Balkan family. Right. So our Ford Motors is still controlled by Ford family. So there are exceptions, but 90% of them, as per the statistics, 90% of them are they do not have a controlling structure. Why do you think this happened in the United States? Tata's founded, Jamshedji Tata founded Tata Group 150 years ago, and still Ratan Tata is in control. I mean, a Tata family member is in control, right? Bhatias, as somebody pointed out, is one of the pioneering businessmen in India. They started I think a shipping company in 1730s. It's still under the control of Bhatia family. Same is the case with Godrej. But in USA, it didn't happen. Why? If it takes in, Raymond's and Singanias, the Singanias are still in control. Kirloskars are still in control. Each of the company have more than 80 years or 100 years of history. Why US it didn't happen? Even in other countries as well, right? Toyota family is still in control of Toyota, even after nearly 80 years. Right? Mitsubishi family is still in control of Mitsubishi Group. Why it didn't happen in USA? That's a question that we need to answer. Is it family conflicts? I cannot attribute a single reason to this. There are multiple reasons. One reason is that the culture, the American culture. Yes, absolutely right, Mr. Akshar. The individualism. The Americans are more individualistic, right? I start a company, I run it. I don't worry about passing on the control of the company to my son or daughter, right? I will increase my stake in. I will run the company as long as I'm a capital manager. I sell my stake and raise more and more money from the stock market. In the process, my stakeholding will come down. I will not worry about retaining the control of the company for my son or daughter. And my son and daughter also won't be interested in running the company. They would say, my papa was interested in running the company. I'm more interested in paragliding. Why should I run the company just because it was founded by my father? He has saved a lot of money. I will use it and go for paragliding or adventure sports. Why should I run the company? That is individualism. Right? That is one reason. The second reason is that Europe, in Europe, even in Europe, you have the family control in most of the companies. The countries were very small before the integration of formation of European Union, borderless European Union, custom borderless. The countries were, their borders were closed. And hence, if a company is founded in Germany, that company cannot do business outside Germany. And Germany is a small country in terms of population. So the capital that you need to run the company and do business is very limited. So I found a company, I start a company by investing X amount initially. I may need some X plus amount to expand it, and that's all. Because my market is limited to Germany or West Germany, that's all. I cannot go and do business in France because France borders are closed. Even if you have to do business, you need to take a lot of special permissions. It doesn't worth the headache. So I don't have much of opportunity to expand my business. My capital requirements are limited. If I am a German company, if I am a French company, if I am a Spanish company. On the other hand, in US, right, the market is vast. If I am founding a company in the state of New Jersey, the entire US is my market, right? So I need a lot of money if I have to capture the market. And I cannot pump all the money from my pocket. My sources are limited. So what do? I go to the stock market, raise funds. When I raise funds, my shareholding in the company comes down. And I'm not worried about losing my shareholding because I'm not worried about giving the control of the company to my son or daughter. And not only that, it is easy to raise funds from capital market, stock market as well. As late as 1980s, in India, not everybody can invest in stock market. I remember my father. My father was a professor in a college, a commerce professor, in fact, and so he know about investing money in stock market. But when he tried to invest, where we had little surplus, and when he tried to invest, he couldn't. Despite having the knowledge about it, he couldn't invest. Why? Because we were based in some remote. He was a professor in a government college. It was in some village. Okay, and in that village we didn't have telephone connections, and from there it's difficult to find a stockbroker who can invest the money on behalf of my father. The stockbroker was based in Chennai, and he refused to take my father as a client. He said it's not going to work out. You don't have a phone, right? So basically, the point was that my father was unable to invest in stock market as late as 1980s. The stock market investment was limited to few selective cities: Bombay, Ahmedabad, Calcutta, Madras, Delhi. That's all. The people in other cities cannot invest. It means if you're coming out with an IPO to raise funds, you need to keep in mind that only the investors in these cities would invest, nobody else. Whereas in US, the stock market mechanism was strengthened. The investment opportunities were made open to the American public during the World War I itself. Everybody, people were encouraged to invest in war bonds. And once they invested in war bonds, America ended up being on the winning side. So plenty of returns were given to the people who invested in war bonds. That made the American people to realize that, oh, this is a good thing. Right? If I put my money in a bank, which is saving, I get limited returns. If I invest my money in the financial instrument, I get plenty of return. So I'll start investing. So the awareness about investment went up in early 1920s itself. In fact, John F. Kennedy's father, I forget the name of that Kennedy, he was also a senator, and he once made a comment about that, he was in the New York State, and working along the, he said one of the, he was walking in the street and he went to a shoe polishing guy on the roadside, and while polishing the shoe polishing boy was talking about stock market investment. Right? He recorded it in while he was speaking in the Senate. He said that is a level of awareness. A shoe polishing boy is able to know and talk about stock market investment. I'm not telling he has right stock tips and all, but he knows what is investing, what is the meaning of investing in stock market. That is a level of awareness in 1920s in United States. So on one side, you have people who want to raise money from capital market. On the other side, you have people who are willing to invest in stock market. All these things put together, along with the culture, resulted in US companies, the promoters reducing their shareholding in the company. Okay, so that is why US, the companies, the families do not control that. So I think with this we will stop it. So I think we laid a decent foundation on both the sides. That is the history of corporate firm and also the ownership. So in the next class, we will start by introducing corporate governance or defining corporate governance. Okay. If you have any questions, you can write to me, right? Or you can write it and then you can ask it in the class. Okay. So thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
We can take.
Thank you, sir.